Hi everybody, Kat here. Welcome to my channel. Well, today we're going to look at a question. How do we ever get here? How do we ever get to the position that we are questioning everything we hear about members of the royal family? We are questioning everything they do and their motives and their intentions. We're questioning information and disinformation and who's lying, who's telling the truth, and what's being suppressed, and what they're telling us and what they don't want us to know. Was Harry right? Is Harry right? Does the palace manipulate the press? Does the palace have the press in their pocket? Well, I'll tell you, he's not completely wrong. There are instances going back decades, if not hundreds of years, of the palace influencing the press with the intention of suppressing information that they don't want the public to know. In not so long ago, in the time of the Prince or Duke and Duchess of Windsor, we had huge intervention by the palace for the press. You see, everybody talks about, okay, the abdication crisis. He had to step down because they wouldn't allow him to marry a twice divorced. Her husbands are still alive. He couldn't be king. He stepped down to marry Wallis Simpson because, they wouldn't allow him to be king and marry her, so he had to abdicate. Now, we know now that that's the narrative they like to put out. He abdicated for the love of a woman, Wallis Simpson, and we've had all kinds of similarities made between Edward and Wallis and the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Harry and Meghan. And, there are some similarities, but again, those aren't all they think. But here you go. The abdication crisis, what the public knew of it was that he abdicated for the love of a woman. In truth, he was pushed off the throne for his left-leaning socialist attitudes, collusion with the Nazis. He was happy to be fostering the position of being an associate of Hitler's. The plan was, if the British government basically allowed Hitler to go ahead and do what he was going to do, that the ousted king would become, a puppet king. They'd bring him back. Hitler would bring him back as a puppet king of the regime if Hitler was allowed to do what he wants. So the king, and then after abdication, the Duke of Windsor, was sympathetic to the Nazis, sympathetic to Hitler, and he was working on Churchill and the British government for a program of appeasement, basically letting the Nazis do what they want. And for a time, this was entertained, but then even Churchill turned on the king. Now, what the public was told, that it was all over the love of a woman. But even at that, even though that was the misinformation, that wasn't even allowed in the British press until 2 weeks before the abdication. Now, the establishment, the government, the elites, the aristocrats in Britain, all knew about the affair with Wallis Simpson that had been going on for, I think, 4 years at this point. By the time he became king, It had been going on for a long time. And among the social circles, we shall say, and the court, it was well known. But the British public didn't know anything about it. The palace suppressed it. They had the cooperation of the press not to print the story. Now, these stories were printed overseas. They were printed here in North America. Pictures of Edward and Wallace on a holiday, I think in Greece on a yacht, that, proved an affair. They were published over here. They were never published in Britain. The British public knew nothing about Wallace Simpson till about 2 weeks before the abdication crisis came to a head. That's just one example. Think about some other things over the years. It's not just recently with Harry and Meghan's so-called children that there's discrepancies and disinformation and misinformation and who knows what the truth is. There has been scandal and controversy around lots of royal births going back a long time. I've done a few episodes of Who's Your Daddy, and there's more to come, and some of them might be quite surprising. It's not necessarily that I believe every single one of them, but enough people have investigated. Enough interesting things have happened that just don't seem to make sense and fit the preferred narrative that they put out that makes you question these things. We know during the Diana years that Charles was speaking to his friends and they spoke to the press on his behalf, not unlike what Meghan and Harry are doing now. We know that Camilla had a friend in the press that she would meet for lunch once a week and promote the stories of, Diana, she's crazy, she's paranoid, she's frantic, she's bulimic, she needs to be hospitalized, she's unwell and crazy. And, they had a certain amount of sway to get their side of the story to discredit Diana into the press. Now, Diana was doing the same thing too. She was. One of her best friends was Richard Kay, her closest associate in the press, who still is a prolific journalist and royal reporter today. And he used to meet with her all the time, and she would pass information along to him to get her side of the story out in the press. We know her cooperation with Andrew Morton and the book. I mean, this has been, the palace has been courting the press for a very long time. They may not do it directly, but they certainly have done it. And things like suppressing information, there's been lots of books written by credited journalists and investigators, just for example, about Diana's death. Stories that don't fit the narrative. Information that doesn't match up with the controlled storyline of what happened in that Paris tunnel. Lots of questions. But don't you know, I know of at least 3 books, one written by a Brit and 2 by Americans, that have been banned from being published in Britain. Isn't that interesting? So much for free press. And that was, over 25 years ago that she died. And these books have come out in the ensuing years. The most recent one, I think, was 2013 or 14 that I'm referencing, that I do know about. And there's been others, and there's been more since then, that don't believe don't believe the narrative. The drunk driver, no seatbelt. I mean, there's so much information. You want to go down a rabbit hole? Wow, that's a good one to go down. But yeah, the palace. One interesting little fact, if you go back, and you can find them on YouTube, I mean, just hours of like when the different TV channels were announcing first the accident and Diana's been injured and this and that, and then the full-blown 24/7 coverage of, she's died. Well, if you follow this, if you go back and you listen and you find it, and you can, within an hour of Diana's death announced on the BBC, the palace made a statement. Here comes our controlled narrative. The palace came out and said, regrettably, that Diana had died as a result of paparazzi following the car, and the driver was drunk. An hour after they announced her death, this is the palace's statement. How did they know? They hadn't even retrieved the bloody bodies by then. Good grief, no autopsies in. I mean, wow, if you listen to the inquest information from years later, I mean, the autopsies don't even add. The whole thing, it's like Kennedy's death. The narrative is wrong. You may not know exactly what happened, but it didn't happen the way they're telling you. Same kind of a thing. And the palace is thick with this stuff. Think about it. The press might massage stories coming out of the palace. They might spin stories coming out of the palace. They might blow open stories coming out of the palace. But you can bet that if something is brought out or something is leaked or something, it's because the palace wants it to be. They only tell you what they want you to hear. And this is true. And in this regard, Harry was right. Where he missed the mark was he's failed to somehow realize, he's trying to personalize it, make it all about him. He has failed to realize that although, yes, they do try to control the narrative, and they're quite successful at it a lot of the time, Harry forgets that all of the antics he got up to, the bad grades and the drugs and the this and the that and the strippers and the, Las Vegas, all of the things the palace protected and covered his arse all his life till he left. The things that we know about Harry, there's rumors that there's a whole lot and a whole lot worse that we don't know, that they have suppressed and kept quiet and covered up. So this is why we're here. This is why this channel exists, because we just know there's a whole lot more there under the surface than we realize. Things aren't what they seem. Things aren't what we're looking at. Something's wrong from stem to stern of this whole thing, and we don't have a handle yet on the extent of the royal family's influence, power, wealth, and control in the grand scheme of things. So we're going to keep looking at information as far out as it may seem. We've got to entertain these ideas. At the very least, we got to know the information that's out there so that we can make our own decisions. After looking at the information and doing a little bit of research, we can come to our own conclusions. We may not always agree, but what we will agree on is that things are not always what they seem, and we want to find out. So we're going to go forward together. I've got some great plans for some new videos coming up very soon. I hope you'll join me. Like, leave me a comment, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.